Thank you. Good afternoon. So first of all, thank you to the IJOC for the invitation, and I'm very delighted to see such a big crowd and people here today. And I'm also delighted to see that we have been re-invited again after last year's presentation. So that's a good sign. Not sure because if it was not clear last year and you needed more time to digest and have more questions. But thank you so much. So we've been asked to do an update on the FEI general regulations. There are some key changes into the system, and we have also expanded a little bit the topics, but we will discuss afterwards. So we suggest to have the following items to be discussed today. So the review of the FEI legal system, then the decision-making process at FEI events, which has not changed drastically. The online injury reporting on the force, we touched base a little bit this morning with Stefan, but I will expand a little bit more afterwards. Field of play decisions, and here we will show a video and ask you a few questions and see how you would deal with the incident. And then the FEI safeguarding policy against harassment and abuse. So that are the topics. And I will give the floor first to Anya Power for the review of the FEI legal system. She was heavily involved in the drafting of the changes, and she's the master of the review of the legal system. So thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. I think Mikael and I are the only two people in the room that are disappointed that Santi's presentation was so interesting, because we said if people fall asleep during that one, it won't look so bad when they fall asleep during our presentation called Review of the General Regulations. But sadly, he let us down, and it was a really, truly interesting presentation. So I'm not going to say that ours is going to reach the same level of interest, but we do our best to give you a little bit of information on what is, on the face of it, looks like quite a boring topic. But the reality is that every time you go to an event, these rules, you rely on them, and the processes in the rules are something that are there actually to help you rather than to trip you up. So when we talk about what is the legal system, we're mainly talking about one section of the general regulations. And within that section, you will see that it deals with the legal powers and responsibilities of officials, a scale of penalties. Very importantly for you in your day-to-day duties, it deals with the procedures for lodging protests and appeals, and then it has some general principles as well. So last year we set out on a bit of a mission to review it, and it had been on our to-do list, to be honest, for a number of years, and we always said, oh, this year is busy, this is not the year to do it, this year there's other changes, but finally we put ourselves together last year and we said, let's review it. And so we had a few aims when we set out to review the legal system. We needed to make it more user-friendly. The feedback we always had when we met with you officials, with chef d'équipes, with athletes, was that under the old system in the rules, it was really confusing. And people weren't sure, is it a protest, is it an appeal, what can I challenge, what can't I challenge, when do I go to the tribunal? And that was a really fair feedback we felt. And we felt that that was our primary mission. At least let's make it clear for everybody what the processes are. We wanted to make it cost-effective from organisers' point of view as well, and efficient, and most importantly, to have decisions taken by the appropriate bodies at an event. So, firstly, let's go to the on-site legal processes. And what we wanted to make it there, going back to our attempt to have things clear, we said on-site, at an event, it's the ground jury who are in charge. Any decisions to be taken, overturning anything that happened at an event, let's say this is for the ground jury. So part of that, as Stefan touched on this morning, involved the removal of the appeal committee, and I'll come to that a little bit later. So basically, if we need to summarise the legal system at an event in a very simple way, anything that happens during the weekend of an event, it's the ground jury who's in charge. No other decisions will be made by any other body other than the ground jury at an event. Off-site, then we're talking about headquarters have a role, the FEI tribunal has a role, sometimes the Court of Arbitration has a role. But on-site at an event, it's you as judges, as members of the ground jury who are empowered to take the decisions there. Just important to note, what we didn't change is the type of decisions that can be protested on-site and those that cannot. So these are the same, but it's always worth running through the list of what you can protest against and what you can't. So you can protest against the eligibility of a horse, athlete, conditions of the arena before the competition starting, obviously. The obstacle, the plan length of a course, again, before it starts. Any irregularity or incident during a competition, results and procedures in the application or implementation of a rule. And of course, with all of those, there are specific deadlines set out in the rules, and just be very aware of what the deadlines are. For example, some of them are 30 minutes before the start of the competition. So if somebody comes to you and the competition is to start in 10 minutes and the deadline was 30 minutes before that, you're completely entitled to say, no, you're out of time here. So don't be afraid that if there's a deadline in the rules, you can apply that deadline and that's the end of the story. What can't be protested against? And this is something, again, it's important to have in the front of your mind, because in the heat of a moment, somebody will come running up to you and they say, I need you to change this. But the rules are clear about what you can and cannot accept protest for. Field to play decisions, factual observations, marks for performance, obstacle knocked, the elimination of disqualification of a horse for veterinary reasons, similarly with an athlete for medical reasons, and giving a yellow warning card. As mentioned a couple of times, we don't have an appeal committee anymore at any level. And when we were reviewing the legal system, we did a kind of a study and reviewed some statistics and a bit of analysis about the role of appeal committees at events. And the major finding we found was that at the vast majority of events, there were 0 appeals to the appeal committee. Even at the major events where you would think there would be a lot of appeals, at Olympic Games, from the past 2 Olympic Games, I think there were 1 appeal. And so we had 3, 4, 5 members flying to the other side of the world, great expense for organising committees. Similarly, for Nations Cup finals, World Cup finals, very few appeals. And so we said, and all it was really doing was giving rise to some confusion, with Chef to keep saying, this has happened and the rules indicate it's an appeal rather than a protest. I don't know who to go to. And they're kind of running from Billy to Jack on site, trying to figure out who was the right person to hand their piece of paper to. So now it's clear there isn't an appeal committee anymore. Under the system now, a couple of roles that were previously with the appeal committee, such as passport irregularities, have been transferred to the ground jury. So the ground jury really has authority to deal with all on-site issues. Doesn't change the table I just looked at a minute ago, saying what can and can't be challenged. That table has stayed the same, as I mentioned. If you, as a ground jury, take a decision based on a protest, under the old rules, there was a possibility to go to an appeal committee if there was one on site. As there is now no appeal committee, if somebody wants to challenge that rule, they need to file a formal appeal with the FEI tribunal, and that will be decided by the tribunal a month, 2 months down the road. And really, this is not, some teams, and Chef keeps initially said to us, are we not disadvantaged by this anyway? And our finding was no, because even if it went to the appeal committee and the appeal committee disagreed with them, they would end up challenging it to the tribunal anyway. So it ended up on the same desk anyway. So we're really just cutting out one step of the process. Just to draw one new thing to your attention, and this is to do with disciplinary offences by members of the athlete entourage. Here I'm talking mainly about parents in maybe pony competitions, young rider competitions. And I'm sure you've probably all had the unfortunate experience of being berated by a very angry parent who thinks little Jenny or little Johnny didn't do what you said he did. And because parents aren't registered with the FEI, we cannot really take any disciplinary action against them because they don't really fall under our jurisdiction. And when we reviewed the legal system, we said, let's take an opportunity to try and address this, because it's not something that should be part of the sport. It sets a really bad example for everyone when you see somebody, a parent, for example, screaming at a judge. It's not something that we want to see. We don't want our sport to go down the route of football, where referees can just be cursed and blinded at. It's not something we want. But it was kind of tricky to come up with a mechanism when we already knew that many of these people are not under our control or within our jurisdiction. The solution that we have come up with after some consultation is maybe not a perfect solution, and we don't know, to be honest, how it's going to work in practice. But What we are saying now is you can issue a yellow warning card to the person responsible for an incorrect behaviour by a member of their entourage. So when we say entourage, we mean parent, spouse, partner, family member, coach, trainer, groom, crew or other person directly connected with the PR, and that includes also the owner of a horse. Could this have harsh results? Yes. I mean, the pony rider whose parent has screamed at an official and the rider gets a yellow card, it's a harsh sanction. However, it's probably unlikely that that parent will behave in the same way the next time when they have to go home and explain to their own child and the rest of their family members why little Johnny or Jenny got the yellow warning card. It was because of their own behaviour. So, as I say, we don't know how this is going to work in practice. We don't know how you as officials are going to apply it. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't work, but we felt it was important to send a message to the community that there are certain kinds of behaviour that are not allowed. I want to just touch very quickly on a new system that we have in the legal system, which is a really snappy name, so sorry for that. It's called the Administrative Disciplinary Process. And this is basically allowing headquarters to sanction people directly for less serious offences. And here we're talking about something that would have a maximum sanction of something like a 3-month suspension. And why we're giving this power to headquarters is that if a disciplinary case has to go to the tribunal, that can take sometimes 3, 4, 5 months before you have a decision. And sometimes we need to act much more quickly than that. Maybe there's an event next week and we need to make sure that the athlete or the person in question doesn't go ahead and participate next week because it wouldn't be fair to do so. So what we're saying, we're letting the tribunal focus on the more serious offences, whereas headquarters can deal with the more day-to-day type of offences. And it's not that it's going to be a suspension every time. There's a range of sanctions that can be imposed, like a warning, a fine up to 2,000, a provisional suspension. The strongest suspension that headquarters could impose would be a suspension up to 3 months. Just one, I thought it's fair that we flag it here today, and that's the demotion of officials or removal of officials from a specific event. And first of all, to bring that to your attention, that power does now lie with headquarters. It's something that we really hope that we would not have to use frequently. However, it's there, and it's different from what Frank mentioned this morning where he talked about transfer down. A demotion, it is a sanction. It is a penalty for wrongdoing. What it's not there to do is to penalise honest mistakes. None of us are perfect and make mistakes all the time. Sorry, Mikael, but it happens. And you, in your range of duties, it's mistakes that happen. But what this is to deal with wrongdoing, offences, and it's a wide group of officials, and sometimes people do engage in practices that are not correct and that are not for the good of the sport. I'll give you an example, not necessarily from this discipline, but we've had a case before of a foreign judge sending in a foreign judge report for an event that they never attended. Yeah, and it's, this can have consequences because there's specific roles for a foreign judge at an event, and we need someone to sign off that the event happened in accordance with the rules and the person wasn't there. So these are the kind of things that I'm talking about. This is something that, action needs to be taken, and a rap on the knuckles isn't good enough. But before any sanctions are imposed, it's important to know that the official, the athlete, has a full right to be heard. You won't get a letter in the post saying you're suspended, you're out. If something happens and we need to find out, the legal department will write to you saying, we have a report that X happened at event A. Please give us your explanations on it. Is it true? There's always two sides to every story. Maybe it's not true at all. Maybe there's a really honest explanation for what happened. So nobody's going to just jump the gun and impose a suspension immediately. We have to find out the full story. So the same way, when you're at an event, you need to find out the full story. If an incident happens, so do we. And any decision that's taken can be appealed to the FEI tribunal and all the way up to CAS. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, in the general regulations, there are some rules there about decision-making processes. And I mentioned that these processes are really there to help you. They're not to overly complicate things. They're not to trick you up. Basically, when we say we have processes, is because what we want is consistency. If incident X happens in Belgium this weekend and incident X happens next weekend in France, we want to ensure that the processes used in arriving at the decisions were the same at both events. And this doesn't necessarily guarantee that the decision will be the same, but at least you have the assurance that a process that was fair, transparent and clear was followed. So I think we've had the pleasure of meeting a good few of you at different major events over the years, and when we go to the event we try to have a very quick informal meeting with the judges just to refresh about what the processes are that you need to follow. And I think it's a good practice, even if we're not there, to meet between yourselves before an event and just to remind yourselves, what do we do if we receive a protest? Because when we talk about protests, there's good news and there's bad news. The bad news is that there are an unlimited number of scenarios that can happen at an event. We couldn't even think of all the different things that could happen. But the good news is the processes to be followed are always, always, always the same. If you take the same steps, A, B, C and D, in terms of processes when you get a protest, you're going to be fine, regardless of what decision you arrive at. If you follow the processes, if you give the people the right to be heard, you're going to be okay. Your decision is going to be upheld. What we say before you take any decision regarding a protest, first point, consider if you have jurisdiction or not. That means consider if you are actually allowed to change your decision. If we go back to the table earlier, let's take the example where somebody came up and they protested against the official time that was registered for their round. The rules are really clear. The rules say this is not something that you're allowed to protest against. And in that situation, of course, bring them in, listen to them, check first of all, do you really want to formally file a protest? And that's an important step, because if they want you to consider something, they need to file a protest so that it's formally recorded. They need to pay the fee. So if they've done that step, and you are completely entitled to say, if they're challenging the round, this is not something that we actually have authority under the rules to change. And that's the end of the story. If you do have jurisdiction, if it is something that you are allowed to consider, then you have another few steps to go to. Examine all the available evidence, whether written or oral. Talk to as many people as you can within the time to get the full picture. As I said, there's always two sides of a story, and sometimes there are 4 and 5 sides of a story. And then hear everyone concerned. Bring the person in who's making the protest. Let them explain what they're protesting about. It's remarkable how often, once somebody who is filing a protest gets the chance to explain it, they are already de-escalating in terms of temper, their mood. Once they feel they've gotten it off their chest and they can say what they have and they feel they're getting a fair hearing, the atmosphere in the room changes almost immediately. So hear them out. Don't just say, go away, I'm not listening to you, because then they're going to go away, they're going to be twice as mad. So bring them in, explain your decision-making process, listen to them, and then at the end of that, give them your decision. A fair and equitable decision, if possible. I've already gone through the jurisdiction point, so I won't labour that, but if you decide that you don't have jurisdiction to hear something, you don't need to go through the hearing out the full story. If you decide we don't have jurisdiction, you don't need to take it too much further. And as I said again, just listen to the evidence, find the evidence, hear everyone, even if you initially believe that there is no protest, that there's no jurisdiction. Listen to people, let them get it off their chests, and it's going to help you in the long run. And if there's an informal objection or protest to a decision, say for example, a wife of an athlete comes up and says, I want to protest that. And they're not allowed protest because the rules say it's quite a limited list who can protest. The FEI can protest, officials can protest, but usually we're talking about it's the chef to keep, or if there's no chef to keep, then it's the team representative. If there's not a team representative, then it's the athlete themselves. But obviously, and this is common sense, and I'm sure you all know this, you don't just say, sorry, you can't protest. Of course, you guide them to the person, say, you can't protest, but your chef to keep can. Because what people get upset and frustrated about is, you know, if the answer was there or the route to protest was there and nobody really explained to them how to do it. So again, that can help. Once people feel that you're on their side, that you're actually trying to help them, it makes their attitude towards you a bit more positive, I would say. And then you need to notify the decision. And the rules say where possible to notify in writing. We know that at an event you're really busy and it's not always possible. It's just good to have a record of the decision for future reference, or if they want to challenge it up to a higher level, it's good for the person going away. But at least maybe sometimes the solution is you notify them orally, and then a few hours later you can give them the formal written decision once the competition has ended and you've had time to consider it. And speaking about timing as well, if you get something happening, a protest, in the middle of the competition when you're judging, again, it's completely fair enough to say, thank you for that, we're judging right now and we'll consider it as soon as the class ends. That's fine, you don't need to give someone a decision there and then. In terms of the actual forms, on the website we have template forms for filing a protest, and we've also prepared a template decision for the ground jury that we can circulate to Jan Willems so that you can all have it as well. As it just kind of guides you kind of what little tick box exercise, what time was the protest filed at, did they pay the deposit, etc., just to help you a little bit along the way. So that's all I have to say about that. I'm sure, as I don't think people knew who I was this morning, so Mikael got all the questions, but I'm available I'll be around for the rest of the evening if anyone has any other questions. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Aine. So we are, of course, also available at the end. When I'm finished, you can also ask a question. So I want to touch base quickly on the online injury reporting and falls. So you probably, when you officiate, you're aware that there is a form that is available, what we call in the FEI Doctors Pack, and it's a resource for organizing committees, medical services, and the officials. And you can access this document on the FEI website. And then you have the online person injury reporting system that is described as well, and you have guidelines on the website so you can see exactly what needs to be done. Why is it important that you fill this online person injury reporting? Well, first of all, it has a fitness to compete and return to play considerations. And as it was mentioned this morning, there is an information that goes automatically to the National Federation. So if you fill in the online reporting system and there is, let's say, a suspected concussion or fall, broken arm or something, the National Federation, they have designated a person within the Federation that is responsible for tackling this matter specifically, and they receive the information automatically. The FEI, we don't need to do anything else. So they can then prevent an athlete to compete because maybe there are some safety requirements to be tackled, and they want the rider to be checked before he can compete again. And I'll give you an example on why we implemented this. We had the question in the past, there was an American rider competing in Italy who had a bad fall, but the US Federation is responsible for the fitness to compete of the athletes. But how did they get the information about their rider that is competing across the ocean? They had no way to do it. Now with that system, they receive that notification and they can act really quickly, and they can contact the rider, check whether he's okay or she is okay, whether he was or she was sent to the hospital and so on. So it's very important, and very important to know as well that the information is limited to only the people that need to know. So we are not spreading the information about injuries, about things that has happened at events. Now regarding the falls, and I'm not going to go again through all the different scenarios that Stefan did already in the morning regarding Article 224, but basically we had last year lots of questions with this clearance, whether a doctor could clear or whether it should be checked. And we had clarified, and I think now it's better to understand. In the past it was the medical doctor needed to clear the rider before it could compete, and clear would mean that he would stamp and sign off that the rider was fit to compete. And the challenge was, most of the time, the doctor either has no experience in equestrian sport, or he would not necessarily be a doctor. Maybe it would be the Red Cross, maybe it would be first aid personnel, so they would not want to take that responsibility. So we have also clarified last year that the decision lies with the ground jury. So here also it says the ground jury reserves the right to exclude the athlete from participating. And I think you need to read this in conjunction with the article in the general regulations, which is the ground jury, after consultation with the responsible medical officer, and we added there as well, or if not available, with the relevant medical doctor and or the event medical service, may at any time exclude from further participation. So again, it's the ground jury who takes the decision. I got the question before the lunch, what do we do if there is no medical doctor on site? So I know it may happen. It may be you are in a situation that there is no medical services, there is no medical doctor, but you saw a bad fall from the rider. So my view, my opinion, that I prefer you to be overly conservative and to prevent a rider to compete. And if the rider complains, and is likely to complain, or his national federation will complain, or the horse owner will complain, you say, you know what, the ground jury, we can take the decision, we can exclude you for further participation. But if you can go and you give the responsibility to the athlete, if you can go to see a doctor or a hospital that can give you a certificate or a clearance or additional information on examination, you may revise your judgment. So don't be afraid to put that responsibility on them. And then it's up to them if they need to drive 100 kilometers to see a medical doctor to go to the hospital, or if they have to wait 5 hours or whatever. So you can do that. And I also hear often the comments from you that, first of all, you are not doctors, so how do you make the assessment? And I think here again, I want you to be really aware that you are not personally liable. When you are officiating on behalf of the FEI. You are the FEI. And we have a rule in our general regulations which says all officials acting at or in relation to an international event are acting on behalf of the FEI and therefore are not liable financially or otherwise for any acts, omissions or decisions undertaken in good faith in connection with the duties. So of course you need to be in good faith. If you start to be in bad faith, we may have difficulties to defend you and it may backfire. But if you are taking the decision in good faith with the information you have at the time and you say, you know what, it's a $1 million prize money, you rider, you are not going to compete because you have a concussion. The rider is going to explode. He's going to say, I'm going to sue you, I'm going to ask for damages, your decision remains. If he wants to sue you, he's actually going to sue the FEI because you represent the FEI. And the FEI will step in. We will back you up and we will be defending you. We will be defending the decision. So don't be scared. Don't be afraid to take the decisions. Of course, it's easier for me because I'm sitting in an office and I'm not facing this and I'm not facing an angry horse owner or rider. But then we will be there to back you up. We will be defending you. And the FEI has also insurances depending on the incident, so we also have measures to take. And again, act in good faith, and I want you to really protect the safety and the health of the athletes is really paramount. And we see in other sports as well that sometimes they were not taking the right decisions, either the organizers or the officials, and then they may be sued. So really, I want the FEI to take their responsibility, and we need to protect our athletes. And of course, you may also have situations where you have the team doctor telling you that the rider is fit to compete. But the team doctor is a team doctor that gives an advice for the best athlete for his or her national federation, and there is a medal at stake or there is high prize money. So that person is not necessarily independent, not necessarily objective. And again, that person doesn't take the decision. The ground jury take the decision. If you have doubt, you may prevent an athlete to compete. Field of play decisions. I think last year we did a scenario. I'm going to show you a video as well, and then we can discuss.
This is very... Oh
my God!
We have got demonstrators have come out into the arena, but Mark's remained focused. This is quite dramatic. This is not fair to the horse, to the rider, to anybody.
She got right in the line of the triple.
Tremendous performances under the pressure. Now, I know rules are rules, Alice. How level-headed, how level-headed.
It was unbelievable. First, you and I heard the yelling, and we didn't know what it was about. And you can see she's in the line of this triple, which is terrifying, to tell you the truth. And then she tried to get in his way between the Oxer and the Liverpool vertical.
Well, in the top 12, there were 2 surprises from the top 20. Antonio.
So you probably all, or many of you, remember this. So we are talking here about the European Championships in Rotterdam, Olympic qualifier, European Championships, medal at stake. And I know some of you were there or involved, so I'm not here to blame or to say anything bad. I just want to use this as kind of a case study, and I will tell you what are the expectations and what you can do and cannot do. So out of interest, if you were in the grand jury, what would you do during the round? Like, would you ring the bell? Would you stop the rider? Or you would just do nothing? Who would ring the bell? I see a few. Who would not ring the bell? Most of the others. So I think there is no right or wrong answers. And again, and I'll explain to you later, we are not expecting officials to take the right decision, but it has to be an honest decision. And I think here you can look, people may have different views, and as you may know the rules, the rider has the possibility to stop voluntarily and to raise his hand. Key and a corner, exactly. Or the grand jury can ring the bell. And it will all depend on the circumstances. You may feel that it might be dangerous for the rider, so you may want to ring the bell. You may feel that he deviated from his line, so you want to do it. You may say, oh, he is not raising his hand, he seems to be focusing. It will actually be worse if I'm going to stop him. So here again, it's a judgment call, and judgment calls are always very difficult, but as long as you are not doing it in bad faith, you are totally fine. Now, we take the scenario, you do not ring the bell, and the rider does not stop voluntarily. Basically what has happened there. So after the round, he comes to you, to the grand jury, and complains and wants his one-time penalty. So he had one-time penalty. He wants it to be removed. So what do you do? What is the first thing you do? You say no. Okay, that's the thing. I think if somebody once comes to you and say, you need to change this, I don't agree, you saw that I was interrupted. The thing is, okay, there is a mechanism. If you want, either you may lodge a protest if you want, you may legally challenge the decision of the grand jury. It means that it has to be chef d'équipe to do it, and then they need to pay the deposit. You may hear all the parties, and then you may decide to either remove the time penalty or not. That's the decision grand jury will need to take. But of course, what happened there is the time penalty was removed. And I understand that one of the comments was, well, it doesn't really make a difference because I don't remember exactly the ranking, but the rider was 8th or 9th and the prize money would be equivalent and it wouldn't make a huge difference. Okay, maybe it would have been fair for the rider, but let's say it was for a medal, bronze medal or not, one-time penalty. Does it change the situation? Or it's to gain an Olympic quota? I think that's where also there was no further protest, but if it had been for a medal or for an Olympic quota, I can guarantee that the affected team will say, well, on what basis did you change the results? Was it based on protest, an appeal? Was it based on mistake? Was it based on... Then it will be difficult to find a justification. And for me, one of the points that I really want to make is no exceptions. You can only grant exceptions if the rules say you may grant exceptions. And it doesn't happen a lot that you can grant exceptions. And you may feel that the rule is not fair on many occasions. And yes, you may have sympathy for the rider. Yes, you may have sympathy, but tough luck. Tough luck. And you are not the rule makers. You didn't write the rules. So we're asking you to apply the rules. So then you will apply the rules as they are written. And you may then contact the FEI and say, you know what, the rules maybe is not fair here, we need to do something. And then, of course, it will be, and I'm sure Stefan will be delighted, as chair of the jumping committee, to have another rule change proposal, as they normally don't have so many, so he really wants you to contact him and to send new proposals. No, but the really point is, and people are talking, and every time there is an exception, then the following incidents, the next incident, they will say, but last week they changed, they removed the time penalty, why can't you do it here? And I hear it from riders, I read it from some officials, so sometimes it's difficult to then say, well, actually, yeah, you have a point that they granted an exception there, but the rules didn't allow. So anytime we grant an exception not covered in the rules, it may backfire. We have the same, at the FEI headquarters, we have to deal with similar situation when you have entries for championships and they miss the deadline. And sometimes, okay, it's a junior competition, the poor rider, we miss the deadline. If we don't let that rider, poor rider, 17 years old, is not going to compete, say, okay, yeah, we can grant an exception there. And then following week, same applies for the European Championship. Yeah, poor rider cannot compete. The European Championship would be an Olympic qualifier. Does it change? Well, if then that rider wins or qualifies for the Olympics, maybe somebody is going to challenge, say, well, you granted an exception based on what? The rules said there was no exceptions. So legally, it's difficult to back up. And field of play decisions, we were actually, in a way, lucky that the Kiana Corner incident in Aachen 2015 went all the way up to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, because then we had a decision from the Court of Arbitration for Sport as to what happens. So basically they say the referee's bona fide, so the official's good faith, exercise of judgment or discretion, is beyond challenge otherwise than insofar as the rules of the games themselves provide. So if the rules doesn't allow for the matter to be overruled, if it's a true field of play matter, then CAS or any court is not going to overrule. And I'll give you an exception to that principle because there are always exceptions. But basically the rationale of the CAS is the CAS arbitrators, they probably have no experience in equestrian sport or in the sport that they have to rule at. They don't have the technical expertise, they don't have necessarily the element of subjectivity is really important that they won't get. And then if we were allowing a court to always overrule a field of play decision, it will always constantly interrupt the competitions and you will never know whether it's the final outcome or not. And it will be opening floodgates, and then it's difficult, as the process may take many months or years, to then communicate the results of it may have other consequences. So here is what the CAS said. So they say that the participants, so the riders, they are entitled to have the officials make honest decision. Not necessarily the correct decision, but an honest decision. As Anya said, we all make mistakes, and that's fine to make mistakes. It's not always black and white, and sometimes you need to make a call, and as long as you do it in good faith and you were really doing it according to what you believe was the interpretation of the rules, you will be protected. Of course, they say that if it's a field of play decision tainted by fraud, arbitrariness, or corruption, then it's a different story. So if a grand jury member received €10,000 to exclude one rider and did it, and that was a field of play, obviously the CAS or the FEI tribunal would be able to overrule that decision. Now, last topic is the FEI safeguarding policy against harassment and abuse. Just want to highlight a few key points. First of all, we have this new policy as of the 1st of January 2019, and I highlighted this last year. It's Appendix I of the General Regulations. It applies basically to anybody. it applies to athletes, accredited persons, FEI representatives, officials, organizers, person responsible, support personnel, coaches, trainers, horse owners, stewards, chef d'équipe, veterinarians, you name it, anybody. And you officials, you are also subject to the safeguarding policy. And you may, there are cultural differences, you may have acts that are what you feel appropriate might not be appropriate in another country or may be perceived as not appropriate. So you may be facing this. So first comment that be careful what you do and what you say. That's the thing. But also, most important, you may witness safeguarding or harassment or abuse case. Or people may come to you and want to report something. So what is the mechanism for reporting an incident? So the FEI, so far, we have decided that we have only one mechanism for the report of incidents, ideally, which is through the FEI headquarters, and we have a safeguarding team, which is composed of Aine, myself, and a third person within the legal department. We wanted to really keep a small number of people for confidentiality reasons and sensitivity reasons. And we also have the integrity unit that will take reports. But of course, that includes out of competition, in competition. But of course, some people may want to come to you and may want to report an incident. So you may guide them to report that to us, but you may also, if they are comfortable, they may also do that to you, and then you can contact the FEI. We have an FEI incident reporting form on the FEI website, and we have a dedicated email address, safeguarding@fei.org. And the access to that email address, it's only Aine, Catherine Bollon, and myself, so it's really a limited number of people who have access to it. And the incident report form that you can find online is basically anybody can fill it in and send it to the FEI. But again, we are available if you see something that is not right and may fall within the safeguarding policy. You can contact us, you can call us, you can send us an email, or you can take the name of the alleged victim, ask that person as well if it would be okay for you to contact us and ask for a follow-up to be made. So that's all we wanted to highlight at this stage, I think. So we are, of course, always available, delighted to take any questions or comments. So you have our email addresses and phone numbers. And I'll take any questions now, if there are any questions. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mikael. I have two questions for you, and they both concern the medical falls rule. Hang on, let me just find them. I'm sorry. Just need to get the rule. One concerns the doctor's pack. One of the earlier versions of the doctor's pack had a part on the second page where the doctor would sign off and say, does the athlete appear to be fit to further participate in this event, yes or no, or not applicable? That's disappeared from the current pack that's on the website. Is there a reason for this?
Yes, because the reason is that we are not asking them to clear the athletes. But there is a section, I believe it's other comments, so the medical person can still provide his or her opinion. If it's obvious and they want to say so, they may say, in their opinion, the rider is not fit to compete. But we removed it because we could see that many doctors were reluctant to take that decision and to do it, so that's why we removed it. And in the end, it's not a decision of the doctor that will fit it in, but it's a decision of the grand jury.
Thank you. And my other query is about an article in the Falls Rule 224, where it says, in case of a fall of an athlete or horse at any time, the athlete must be checked by the event's medical service or by a medical doctor if the medical service is not available.
Yep.
I'm just a little curious why the medical service comes first and can only be checked by the doctor if the medical service is not available. It's just an intellectual curiosity as to why it's not the other way around.
No, the thing in an ideal world, we would want to have medical services at events, and I think it should be a mandatory requirement, but we know the reality is slightly different, but we are working on it as well, and depends on the level of competition. Of course, if you go to Aachen, you would expect that would have good medical services. If you go to a one-star event in the countryside, it might be more difficult. And that's also one of the project that the FEI is looking into. It is we do have FEI veterinarians, but we do not have an FEI medical person. And I think that's also, I heard the questions also earlier today, why is it different for the horse? And for the horse, it can be cleared by the veterinarian. The main reason is because for the horses, we have an FEI veterinarian, which is an FEI official, which is trained and educated by the FEI, so we know that that person can take the decision. We don't have the equivalent yet for the human. And we should, ideally we should, and that's also, if we had that person, it would be more independent. And you see in other sports, and I'll take, for example, the NFL, they had a system a few years ago where they would putting that responsibility on the team's doctor to decide whether the athlete was suspected to be concussed or not. And they could clearly see that given the millions of dollars that was at stake, that the team doctor was never taking an independent decision, and he was paid by the team anyway. So if you have the owner of the franchise and you have your best athlete on the pitch, you want that athlete to compete, and team doctor is kind of reluctant to say, actually he's not fit to compete. So they moved away to that, and they have an independent person, and I think we need to do it. And that's why also, for the FEI purposes, hopefully the medical services are likely to be more independent than potentially the team doctor of an athlete.
Yes, I have a question on language. Sometimes they write in a different language, which we actually can't understand or can't read, and that makes it very difficult to know what they've written.
So are you suggesting to Frank to add languages exams
I do.
Other than English?
I think, Frank, that would be a very good idea.
But in your instance, it does help if you can read, John.
No, but it is difficult. I had it last week where I couldn't read what they'd written, so in Switzerland.
It is a challenge, and also I hear the comments that it's not necessarily easy for the officials to obtain information from the doctors because of that reason, because of language. At least for the online reporting, you have chart when you can actually make drawings and see where the injury is, so at least that should help. And else, the only suggestion is to have somebody help you, probably the organizing committee or somebody can speak the two languages and try to help on that front.
Mr. Rentsch,
yes?
I have a doubt. Elaine Zander from Brazil. I didn't get quite well whether an event can start without medical assistance. If your answer is no, and I don't have this kind of medical assistance in a show, what are the consequences to the organizers? And if your answer is yes, you're saying that the president of the ground jury is the one in charge to evaluate either the rider can go or not go. Thank you.
Yeah. So as to your first questions, it depends on the level of competition, but at the moment there are only guidelines as to what are the requirements for medical services. And again, if you are at the one-star show, there probably won't be any medical services, and it is okay from a rules perspective. Ideally, we would want medical services at every show, but the reality is slightly different. And again, we are working into requirements for that. So you won't necessarily have medical services at an event. That's the first thing. As to your second question, yes, you, grand jury, will need to take a decision whether a rider is fit to compete or not. And I know it's difficult. I know it's going to be tough. You will have obvious cases. Broken leg, that's obvious. He won't be able, or she won't be able to compete. That's easy. Some is like, had a fall on the head, suspected concussion, but I don't know. So for me here, I prefer that you prevent an athlete to compete because you have doubts about his fitness to compete. And again, the rider is likely to complain and scream and say, I'm going to sue you, whatever, and say, you know what, for me, you are not fit to compete. If you can prove to me, if you can give me additional information that may change the mind of the grand jury, be my guest. But you put the obligation on the athlete. It's for him to have his own doctor, to go to the hospital and to come say, look, I did other examinations, here are the results, you can see that I don't have. And again, you may or you may not change your decision depending on what you get, but you may have additional information. And again, it's not the hospital who is going to decide for you, because the hospital that is 100 kilometers away, maybe they say, yeah, the rider is fit to compete, but they have no idea that what is riding and jumping at the 5-star level. So again, it's for you, grand jury. You are the only one taking the decision. Ideally, after consultation with medical doctor, and if not, you can put that obligation on the athlete. Any other questions?